Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. This is episode 126. I am delighted today to be joined by youth football coach Grant Mcleod. Grant, thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
No worries, cheers for having me, man.
I've said a few times for listeners, if anyone does have recommendations of guests, then please reach out and let me know. And this Grant comes off the back of a recommendation from Marcus Ward. So a big thank you to Marcus for reaching out and getting in touch. And after doing a bit of digging round and hearing what Grant's been up to, I know we've got some really interesting stories and experiences that you've been through. So it'd be great to dive into some of those. But do you want to start us off, mate? Do you want to give us a little bit of background on yourself?
Sure. So when I was about 17, I first started coaching. So basically, but I wasn't much of an athlete. I was okay, very bang average. But I started coaching quite early. So it was basically the youth team in my local area were advertising for coaches. So I was like, may as well get involved and I can help out little things like that. And that slowly gathered a bit of momentum. I got a job working for the SFA. And then I was at the SFA for a while doing community stuff, and then eventually led on there was a performance athletes in school program where they coach kids before they go to school, and there's strength and conditioning, different elements of how you want to learn to be an athlete in a full-time environment, but obviously within the local areas. From that, I did my degree in sport and exercise science with Napier University, and then transitioned from coaching to working in strength and conditioning and trying to help athletes, like support athletes after training, whatever this is. I spent 4 or 5 years working in Scottish football. So I was in the Championship, League 2, League 1, different clubs, sort of bouncing about. And then I got a job working for Stirling University as a strength and conditioning coach. I spent a year there working across a number of sports, which was quite nice to get away from football for a while. Triathlon, swimming, tennis, a couple of others. But it was quite nice. There was a bit of variety and not just dealing with footballers all the time. Then I got a move to Singapore. So I moved from here in Edinburgh out to Asia. And I spent 2 years, again, working in multiple sports. So I had Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, MMA, rugby, squash. And then it was kind of a split role between personal training and strength and conditioning. So I had some general population stuff. And then I was working with a number of athletes in different areas, whether we were international level or local level, which was, again, another great experience to see different people doing different things, different challenges. And then my latest job was I moved to Thailand, and I was working as a football coach and kind of youth development coach. I was managing a program for Buriram United, which is a big football club in Thailand. It brings us up to now. I'm back in Scotland.
Now that seems like when you started off your career and you're talking about working in the Scottish leagues and stuff, then all of a sudden you just dropped in and moved to Singapore. So do you want to just talk to us about where that came across? Because I think it's interesting for coaches to hear about opportunities that are out there for coaches, but also how that came across. That's obviously not something that you just stumble over and then all of a sudden end up from being in Scotland one day, Singapore the next. So do you want to just take us through what happened around that, and then also the move from Singapore to Thailand as well?
Sure. So after I left university, jobs were really tricky, actually. Like everyone, I had about 3 jobs. I was trying to do personal training as a strength and conditioning coach, trying to bring in athletes and do general population stuff. I had an internship at university in Edinburgh. I was working for Stirling University, so I was doing their strength and conditioning. So I was traveling about 60 miles between Edinburgh and Stirling and back every day, and I was working ridiculous hours. Like I'd have to be in Stirling for 6 a.m. or 6:30 a.m, be back in Edinburgh in the afternoon, and then I'd have training for Edinburgh City at night, and it was mental. I was all over the place, and I was just trying to do my best. I was like, I want to do this. I have to do this, and we're going to do this. And then I was a girlfriend at the time. She moved off to Singapore, and I was looking at it. So, well, I could run about daft with 3 or 4 jobs, and I'm enjoying it, and it's great, and all that sort of stuff. Or it's like I could go and move into the sun for a little bit and see what it's like somewhere else. And I was like, they've got to have athletes over there, surely. So looking into that, and then there was like, Singapore's an interesting one because outside of the institute, there's not an awful lot of support for athletes. So like I said, like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and MMA, they don't get a lot of funding. They don't get a lot of help from institutes. So they don't have clubs that are really set up in that way to develop people through. So looking into them, and I was still interested in football as well. And it's the same. It's very underdeveloped across Southeast Asia, and even a country like Singapore is very forward thinking, very wealthy. It's not the strongest sporting nation across the football and the other things. So basically, I was looking at it, it's like, well, one, it would be nice to move because you get a nice life and all these sorts of things. The other one is, how would you actually develop like an athletic program for someone who comes from a culture that doesn't really have it at the moment? And that was the kind of the thing for me, is that that's an interesting challenge. Like that'd be pretty, if you could pull it off, the opportunities for you beyond that would be great. It'd be phenomenal. So then I was lucky enough, I got a job with a gym to move out and work as a strength and conditioning coach. And then that was me. I managed to transition over to Southeast Asia and got to see a lot of different things, how they operate and how things work within that culture. Because Singapore is still a very Western country, but it has very, very strong Asian culture because they have, Singapore particularly has about 4 or 5 different nations within it that are very, very strong, and they all have their own cultures and things like that. So it's very interesting then to go into and see like, well, it is westernized, but it's still completely different.
So it's like a true blank canvas you're going into there. But also a takeaway for me on that is that, so is it right that you basically made the move before securing a job?
No, so I had the job lined up.
Okay.
So before I went over, but it was one of those, again, it's like, and this is the thing that I think about Asia is so good, is that they were like, yeah, you can do this or you could do that, maybe you could do this. And like, I think that puts people off sometimes maybe. And it's like, well, you have to go and there's nothing there. There's no big clubs. There's no particular athletes or like whatever, like the reason there, it's not that big. It's not that well developed. But then if you look at it on the flip of that, it's like you can go and you can do pretty much what you want.
Yeah.
Like the opportunities there to go and develop stuff are wonderful because it's like, I really like this idea. I want to run with it. They really like it as well. I see a lot of benefit to bringing it into these athletes. Again, the level of athlete might be low to start with, but as you develop it, these people grow and they get benefit of working with a good coach, and that gathers pace, and that allows other people to start to do. You help other coaches come in and see, oh, I can do that as well. So now you've got a group of coaches that deal with it with good athletes that you've built up, you know.
Yeah, 100%. And we're going to go into some challenges that you faced in those roles in a little bit, because I think that's really interesting. But we're going to start with as well how you found as being the best way of getting your ideas across, because I think this is really fascinating talking to yourself, because obviously we can talk about what you did in Scotland, but then transitioning into Singapore and into Thailand, obviously there's the language barrier, there's different cultures, there's you're going into a setup that doesn't have like an S&C program in place. So what were some steps you took in terms of, right, this is my philosophy, these are my ideas, and now I've got to try and implement them with a group of players that doesn't really have anything in place at the moment?
So Thailand's really interesting. The biggest change between sort of Scotland or the UK and Thailand is obviously the language is very, very different. The language is very challenging.
Yeah, I bet.
But like the things that you won't realize is that like actually their culture is built differently. The way they look at the social structure is completely different. So here in the UK, well, there's a degree of you should respect elders, and then you should look up and okay, I show you respect. But in Thailand, that's everything. everybody respects up to the point where people don't question up. Like, it's very much the hierarchy decides, and that message gets passed down, and the responsibility sits at the top, and they're supposed to help people through in their development. So when you go on and work in that environment, it's very much like, well, you're the boss, you're in charge. You've got to do everything. You've got to get that message to go down across however many people you've got to work with. But then that goes the same way as how you talk. You can't talk up to someone and embarrass them or show them up or all sorts of things. So actually that hierarchical kind of community that they have makes it quite difficult to get stuff done.
Yeah.
If you speak to someone the wrong way, you're going to embarrass them in front of other people. They then don't want to speak to you again. So for you to get stuff done and they don't want to speak to you, you're going to have problems. And if they don't want to speak to you, nothing gets done. If Thailand want to slow things down, they'll slow things down. So basically looking at that, I was like, right, want to keep as many people on site as possible, want to have them working on their own ideas, and we want to make them as happy as possible. Again, one of the big things about their culture is really, it's like, you should enjoy your life. Mm-hmm. You should be pretty comfortable. It should be nice. You should enjoy it. And you should kind of almost work and become second to that. So it's like, they're very much like, let's just do things enough so that we can be happy and enjoy it. So basically needing to keep that within the program was really important. So actually, like, again, another cultural thing within them is they love food. Like, a lot of their lives are built around food. So you find daft little things that, like, asking them when they're going for lunch, what they're going for lunch, is if everyone is going together for lunch. These things make a massive impact because it's what's important to the people. And unfortunately, it took me a little while to realize how important it actually was. But like, you start building your day around that, and they relax a little bit because they know what they want is taken care of to a degree. And it's something as daft as going for lunch or ordering lunch in. But it makes these people more comfortable, more relaxed. So then a little bit more conversation will happen. Once we had a little bit more conversation, once these things get people relax into, there's let's talk about different things, let's develop different things and ideas, and coach education gets a little bit better, and people are coming in with different, I wanted to ask you about this, I want to talk about this. And that was a kind of thing that really opened people up, was like respecting a little bit of that culture and finding out a little bit about that culture. Which took me a while to do, because I was looking at it, it's just food, man. Why is it so important? I don't understand this. But it actually made a big impact. From there, we found that, like, that was when, is it great? All the little things are taken care of around it. But actually, like, on a football side, like, we can't talk about like little things all the time. We have to actually deal with what's important to the academy, what's important to our athletes, and how we're going to actually put it in place. So that had to be different, and that was something that, as long as we had the kind of like, you guys are comfortable, you've got time to relax, you've got your food's organized, you've got whatever it was, like the little things that we thought could help them and be comfortable with them working in the program. The program itself, we thought, had to be quite strict, had to be quite disciplined in how we delivered it. So what we did was actually we blocked everything into very specific blocks, and then within the blocks we gave people sort of, that was your freedom, you can go within there. Because again, it's like, well, if everybody's really relaxed and not fussy, it's like, he's running one program like this team's getting that, he's doing that over there, and you lose that control. Or across the academy, it loses its discipline. You don't really have an identity, or nobody's really working in the same direction. So what we found was, a lot was like, how do we get one system for these people to come in and make little decisions within that dictate how their teams play or how they develop, and like, basically, like, you got your bit of creativity, but there's guidance at every step, essentially.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting and a really important lessons, because obviously you're talking there about a complete shift in culture for yourself, aren't you? Going from the Scottish leagues to Singapore and then to Thailand. But in terms of the things you've spoke about essentially learning about a new culture, learning about the players, learning about what's important to them, basically getting as much information from them and what they respect as possible, even if it is very different to how we work, regardless of what club you go into, we have to take a similar approach, don't we, to make sure we're being impactful with the stuff that we want to try and put into place.
Yeah, definitely. Like the biggest thing is that, like, once I realized that, like, because I always thought, as like, you need to respect the culture. You need, as much as possible, you need to respect it because you're a guest in their country. But the ways that you respect it, like like I say, like organizing lunch and stuff, you don't expect to go into them. But that's one of the benefits. So I spent a lot of time learning to speak Thai and learning how to read and write, specifically from the point, it's like, I want you to see that I'm investing my time in it and I'm trying to understand it. And you learn loads, like, to the point where I started changing how I would deliver coaching points, even if I was speaking in Thai or if I was speaking in English. The way I would use English would be closer to how I would speak Thai, because basically the order of the words is switched. Okay. So even to that point, to make it easier for someone to understand, so some of the kids will speak really good English, some will speak not so good, and some will speak none. But if they've got a very similar order to how they should be, how they think of hearing things, it's much easier for them to pick up on. And then within that as well, is if you're using specific words that they can pick up on much easier. So in Thai language, you cut the sound short at the end of the word. So you don't have very pronounced, like I use the word don't. You got a very pronounced T at the end. Thais don't do that. They'd have a very like flat sound that won't finish. So if you're delivering coaching points, it's much easier for them to pick up on if you're using words that have a flat sound, that don't have like a very strong definite end. So things like if you were saying, oh, I want you to lift the pass in or clip the pass in, they know, that's that little sound, or it's that thing. It makes much more sense. And it's easier for them to pick up on. So again, it's the same as lunch. They're much more comfortable in that moment because it's easy for them to understand. They don't have this strange white guy shouting these mad words at them. And that helps them buy in a little bit more. Like, okay, I can deal with this. I can learn from this. This is easy for me to understand, you know?
That is really, really interesting, and something that a lot of people can take from that. Not that everyone's going to be working with a non-English speaking squad, but also the more practitioners, we do have foreign players coming over a lot more, and we're working with players of all sorts of different nationalities. So I think it's really important to hear your experiences on this. But the other thing with that is that must have really developed your skill of being very, I suppose, efficient with how you're communicating. Because I think as coaches, we can, if I'm speaking to yourself, I could have a conversation. It might take me quite a few words to get across what I want to get across. Whereas if you're speaking to a Thai player or a player of a different language, then you need to be very, very precise, don't you? And get to that point straight away. So I think that must have been something that you progressed with in terms of your coaching.
Definitely. Actually, one of the biggest things that I found was my presentation of anything has gone, like, it's improved like phenomenally. Like, just to the point where it's like I can't rely on being interested in talking, because like my Thai is limited. Like I can only do so much. Talking in English, people will lose interest so quickly. Through a translator, it takes forever to do it. So it's like, right, we're gonna have to find ways to keep people interested. It just has to be better in a visual point. So it's almost like Matt Jones was talking about it while he was in China. It's like you become like one of the Three Stooges. Like you're using physical comedy or like the way you move to keep people interested and to get messages across. To the point where like I actually changed everything for the club to how we do. The club had changed to use Keynote for session plans. So basically, rather than having like some fancy software where you can move players about and do all this sort of stuff, using PowerPoints to create session plans. And then within them, you can animate them, you can add videos, you can have pictures. So we had a structure where everything was blocked for your session. So you'd have your warm up, you get 10 to 15 minute warm up, you've got an introduction to your session, you then have a learning block, these 20, 30 minute blocks, and then you have a game plan block or game plan phase, and you'd move through. To get our message across to the kids, we would actually try and involve them in the process of, not the process, but seeing the session plan, understanding what's going to happen throughout the session before it's going to happen. And I only really thought about this properly near the end before I left. Was like, if you're going into anything you've never seen it before, that's going to be a bit like, oh, I don't know about this. Like, this might be a bit dodgy. How am I going to do this? I'm going to look bad. Like, if I mess this up, if I don't know the game, how is this going to be? So again, showing them session plans and just letting them know, like, this is what you're going to go into. This is what's expected of you. Again, that helped people relax. What we did was we'd have these session plans that were PowerPoints. So you can animate them and you can move them and go, look, if you're in this position, we expect this movement. This is how you score in this game, or this is how we want you to play. Then we can easily add in videos. So like, all right, who's your favorite player? Who's your favorite player? Who's your favorite player? All right, well, they're going to play like this. This is how that fits into this game. And then as you run through before your session, you can go, here's a video, here's an animation, here's what the session is going to look like, and here's going to be your keywords. So then as soon as you're going into the session, all of this stuff's like primed and ready for them to pick up on. And it's, again, it actually makes your life so much easier as a coach, because you're just running through the points in a way that you know is really easy for them to understand.
Yeah, definitely. Because football is essentially an international language, isn't it, to a certain degree? But then at the same time, we use a lot of, if we think about coaching within the UK, we use a lot of different phrases to explain the similar situations or things that we want to get out of things. So I suppose that developing that commonality of language or phrases is really important, isn't it? So where did you start on that? Like, what was your starting point for that? Did you just learn a few that you wanted to get across, and then obviously, like you've talked about, using the presentations to sort of back it up, and then just try and grow your vocabulary from there?
Yeah, basically my first like month, I was just like watching loads and asking, what's that word, and what's that, why do you do this and why do you do that, to find out more. And then what I started to do was try to create a word bank. So basically, like this word's associated with this, and again, Thai is very difficult language. So like some of the words make sense, some of them make no sense, some of them are used by these people but not by these people. So again, within an academy, like, oh, if I say that, he's got no idea. I'm trying to say that in Thai and he's got no idea. And trying to pull that all together, so again, it's difficult again. So we did try and implement, we tried to link the words together as much as possible. So like, in this situation, you're going to probably use these words. So make them as simple as possible for the Thais to use, for English speaking coaches to use. And also, can we use Thai language? Can we use English language? And then when we tied them, you're going to expect to do this within this type of game. So things like a press is easy to work out. Okay, that's going to be more closely related to your small set of games or your individual practices or whatever. But then things like rondos, like we're defining what is a rondo, like how do you play a rondo and what words are you going to use in your rondo, or football tennis, if you're talking about body shape and how you control a ball out of the air, well, what words are you going to use within that game? And we found that it worked to a point, and then it got too big. It was quite difficult to keep the size of it quite manageable, and then that's when it broke down again. But really pairing up the words and to be honest, teaching the kids as well. Mm-hmm. That was a big point, because we had some kids coming in going, what's a rondo? And football tennis, and they'd never played it or they'd never fully experienced it. So really teaching, this is what this word is. This is an opportunity for you to use it, and you're going to learn. And then later on, you're like, well, this is that same word, but you're just using it in the game now. And it's almost like, and I think a lot of people forget about it, is that you're teaching these young people how to use all these things. So with that word bank linked to the games, we could feed them into our session plans, and we can go, in this position, in this game, you're going to use this word, but in the game later on, when we're playing 9v9, 8v8 or whatever, here's how you're going to use it. Here's the actual practical use of it as well.
Yeah, because on that, you're teaching them to take that forward, even if they don't stay at that club or stay with the same coach as well, aren't you? You're trying to develop them as a player that, yes, they do learn a phrase or what it means or whatever it is, but they're not just using it with yourself or in that specific session. They're able to take it on as well.
Yeah, definitely. And like that, in Thailand, there's lots of foreigners that go through Thailand, like, because they have the three outside Asia, 2 within Asia, and 1 other Southeast Asian or something like that. But a lot of people who won't speak Thai. And for them coming in, it's, if you've got this young kid who he's only 18, 19, wherever it is, he's breaking into the first team, and he sees this Brazilian boy for the first time coming into training, and his eyes are like saucers because he's never been in Thailand before. And he goes, oh, this is Monkey, this is Ling Ling, it's a rondo, basically. Ah, okay, no problem. The Thai boy's quite happy because he's relaxed in the environment. He knows all the words, and he's just told the Brazilian superstar striker has just come in. You know what I mean? He's creating connections and relationships and things are building. Like, those things is opportunities for young people to learn are brilliant, because again, it helps them in their career. Not it's a daft little thing, or it seems like a small thing, but it can actually have a bigger impact on how that club operates. Really, is like, it helps people create relationships, helps people talk about things. The biggest one, and we saw in the girls' game, was they had so much more confidence after they'd learned all these words and what the words did and how they used them in the game. Because one of the biggest things is that, like, if you're going to be nervous about anything, it's because you've not done it before, or you're not good at it. So all of a sudden, you give an ability to talk about it, you give an ability to do it, you're going to be quite confident with it.
Yeah, 100%. And we'll touch on your work in Thailand more specifically now, because I think it'd be good to go into we've talked about some of the challenges already in terms of in language and communication, but what were some of the other challenges that you faced in that role?
One of the biggest things is autonomy. So basically, like, a lot of Thai culture, again, because you're looking at the top, works down or helps down sort of thing. A lot of people find it very difficult to take responsibility for themselves, because like, well, someone usually does this for me, and it's very much that, like, they'll look around like, who's going to do this whenever there's tasks get given out. So one of the things that we set out or for me personally, I wanted to do very on was, like, give responsibility. Looking back, I maybe did it a bit too fast. I heard, like, from conversation coaches, well, that's maybe a bit much, and this player would come back and, well, maybe we pushed it a bit much. But for me, again, that's a learning experience. Is like, within something that's completely different. I was like, I want you to have responsibility, because I want you to learn how important this is to take care of things yourself. But potentially doing that in a smaller, more stepping sort of way. But the biggest thing was for our young players, was taking responsibility with little things. And it was a nice way to kind of get in early and, like, not let them just go through their whole life going, well, this is taken care of, that's taken care of. Because there's nothing worse if you've got an academy kid going through to the first team, and he's spoiled, doesn't want to do this, doesn't want to do that. There's expectations, and he's not used to them. So we really wanted to nip that in the bud early, and it was little things like giving little tasks about how you set up sessions. Can they set up part of the session? Can they take down part of the session? And, like, again, these little things, they seem to not be much, but giving responsibility to young people to have conversations with other members of staff. Like, I need you to go and speak to them and deal with this. It helps build their understanding, so that as they go later in life, they're more capable of taking responsibility. Because what we had a lot of coaches who were at university, and to be honest, they weren't great at taking responsibility for things, getting stuff done on time, doing it with good quality, taking care of things. And it's because this culture had taken care of them. it just carried them through. And I go, don't worry about this, buddy. I'm older. I've got this. And it's like, well, that's not going to help them, because in the long run, like, you're always going to have to do it.
But again, that is quite a big shift in terms of culture, isn't it? Because then, like you said, they're not used to doing it. So you're essentially going in to make that positive change. But for them, it's a very big change, isn't it?
Definitely, definitely. And the thing is, they go, wow, you've just doubled my workload, mate. Like, I don't know anybody who's really going to be happy with that. But trying to find a way and make them happy about it, understand the balance, understand the importance and balancing, or being relaxed and actually getting stuff done. It can be very challenging. It can be really difficult. You can kind of clash a little bit with people. But again, if you've taken care of the other things, like, all right, let's go for lunch, let's take care of what makes you comfortable around all this other stuff, it helps buy in, and they see the importance of it. But definitely, from what I hear, a number of Southeast Asian countries are like that.
Yeah,
they're very much hierarchical, and a lot of young people don't have that much responsibility, to be honest.
and again, as much as it isn't probably that extreme over here in the UK, or probably in the European leagues, arguably, there is still an element of that goes on in clubs as well, isn't there? And the fact that you're saying about autonomy and taking responsibility and stuff like that, I think those are key lessons that we have to learn as well. And again, as much as it isn't probably as extreme, there are aspects of that there are common throughout our club. So I think it's really important to hear and hear some of the things that you put in place.
Definitely, like seeing the development of young people as soon as they do take responsibility, though. I think that's one of the biggest things, especially in Thailand. It's easy to see because a lot of people are waiting for other people to do stuff, and as soon as somebody starts to take that initiative for themselves, you see them develop and get so much better, and the confidence starts to rise, and they sort of their development as a person, not just as an athlete or whatever, is massive.
Yeah,
and you can see it incredibly clearly, and it's really nice actually to watch. But like saying, like, even back here, like there's elements, I think it maybe gets kind of brushed under the carpet a little bit because our culture maybe is a bit more forward, or you're expected to have a bit more responsibility. But I think sometimes it is taken for granted that you should be teaching these people to take responsibility for themselves. How do you do it? What sort of words are you going to need to use? What tasks are you going to need to do? Because again, we still see under 20s that go through their careers or whatever, and they're a bit entitled. Don't want to do this, don't want to do that, don't like that.
Yeah, definitely. And I know a big part of your coaching and a big passion of yours is working with the female players over in Thailand as well. So do you want to just give us a little insight into the work that you did with them as well, but also a bit of an insight into women's football in Thailand, because I think it's an area that probably people aren't aware of that much in terms of the standard and the sort of impact that you can have with those players as well.
Yeah, definitely. So again, looking at Thai culture, like, it sounds maybe harsh, but it is like a little bit of a step back in time. It's just like you could even say it's like 10 years behind where we are in the West in terms of some of the ideas and the way they implement certain things. So women's sport it's very sort of niche sort of area for certain girls playing certain sports from certain backgrounds. And it's not a very widespread idea that girls play sport. To the point where I've heard stories of schools tell girls they can't play football still. So for girls to go and to do things, so netball is acceptable, volleyball is acceptable, but football's not, rugby's not. So there are kind of challenges within their culture. It's like women are expected to do certain things, men are expected to do other things, and it's just the way it is. It's kind of a little bit old-fashioned in that sense. So within that, football is a very strange one because it's weirdly developed in the sense that they've got quite a strong national team making the World Cup, but the number of actual athletes playing football or female athletes playing football in Thailand is incredibly low. I think from the FIFA report off the top of my head, I think it was 25,000 registered female football players in a population of 65 million. So they basically they haven't put an infrastructure in place for more than the elite. They have sports schools across Thailand, and they cater for girls in the sports schools. So you maybe have 100 girls at Chonburi. You have 100 girls at get the name, Sisaket, maybe Sisaket, I can't remember now. And there's 3 or 4 others. The names of me now. Schools. So you've maybe got 400 or 500 girls who are coming through an elite pathway across, again, a population of 65 million people. Within that, the girls like, well, I'm 9. I didn't get into a sports school. I don't have that opportunity, so I'm not going to play football anymore because there's no other way. There's no other pathway. There are then dotted about the girls who want to stay in. So they play in boys teams, but then they hit 12, 13 and that's you. You're done. There's no team for you now. Sorry. So a lot of the time girls they get pushed away. For us, we had a girl called Kati who played in our boys team. She was 14 playing in the under 13s. And basically we were looking at all these different things, like why is the national team so strong in Southeast Asia? They went to the World Cup and got battered. But
making the World Cup's a big achievement though, isn't it, as well?
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, for considering what the national game or the local games like, the national team we've been making at World Cup's actually incredible. It's a great achievement. But for us, we were looking at it, I was like, right, well, wow, Kati can't get a team, but they've got these players playing at that level. And speaking to the previous manager that I worked with at the club, they were like, surely there's got to be some way you can bridge that gap. And if you do bridge the gap, surely then it can be really good, because we had the facilities, we had the infrastructure, all these things to run a really good program for girls. But everybody's telling you there's no girls, there's no girls, there's no girls, there's no girls. Basically, like, they were so dotted out and spaced out, and that they would never play together. So basically what we looked at was like, how do we bring a girls team together without taking away? So if there's a girls team in Bang Na, or if there's a girls team in Samut Prakan, if we start our team in the middle, are we going to destroy 2 teams by then pulling all the girls in?
Yeah.
So again, that was another issue that we had to think about, is that, like, having an impact. And yes, there's not an awful lot of girls there, but could you make it worse by putting in another team? So basically what we did was we were like, right, let's just go and support everybody who's there. And we did training during the week, and we allowed them to go and train with their own clubs. They can go and play for their own clubs. And basically we'd be there Tuesday, and I think it was Fridays we started off on. And it's like, here's just access to different coaches that are going to work in the way that we train our pre-academy kids. And we're going to start giving you different things, that we'll go through video analysis, we'll go through talking about nutrition, we'll talk about sleep, we'll talk about whatever it is that you need help within. And we'll see if we can build that kind of just more support rather than anything. And that actually got a really good response, and we started to build, and we actually managed to then put together a team by the summer. So about 6 months in, we got to that point where we had enough kids to form a squad. But yeah, it's again, like, how you look at it. So you could come into Thailand and you look at the point and go, oh, there's no opportunities unless you're in a sports school. Like, there's just none there for you. There's nothing there. Or you can go, well, there's millions of girls in Bangkok alone, and there's no teams for them. And there's no one else competing there. So surely if we work well enough for an extended period of time, we could have a team that could compete with the sports schools. And then, like what happened, we put our squad together and we ended up entering a team into the Thai Women's League. So we became essentially an under-20s team who was allowed to play Thai and international players in the second division of professional football in Thailand.
It's really exciting, isn't it? Because when things aren't set up in place like that, and have to go about doing that graft to create those opportunities, essentially where they go to is up to you, isn't it? Like, it's up to how much work you put in and how much you put behind it. Like you say, it's just that attitude shift of being like, this is an opportunity rather than there are no opportunities.
Yeah, definitely. And we were really lucky. We got to, because we worked in a specific way and we had the structure of our pre-academy behind us, it massively helped. But a lot of it was that we wanted to go and work with these young female athletes, because we saw 2 or 3 of them at the start that she's great, she's wonderful, that she could play with the boys, she could play in the academy, no problem. And then obviously there's others who go, right, we'll work with this and we'll work with that. And you get those sort of comments. Like, even we had a trial session at the start of the year in January last year, and even their coach, we had 27 girls came, but because they heard about the name of the club that were running it, they came from all over the south of Thailand. So we had girls traveling for 2 or 3 hours just to come in and to go to that training session to see what it was. And even then we had coaches on the sidelines going, "It's never work, never work. It's not going to happen. You're not going to do it." And it's that thing where you just need to be excited and you need to drive it and you need to see that opportunity, because a lot of people won't. If you can do that, the opportunity now, like we had 2 girls went through national team selection from that squad. So we had a goalkeeper at 14 who was playing in Thai Women's League, second division. She got 2 games at the end of the season, and she got selected for the national team off the back of. So off of that program, we got to say, well, we were working with international youth athletes in Thailand. One, that was an opportunity that girl was never getting unless she was in that environment, and the exposure that she got, again, working with foreign coaches, the opportunity for her to play in a different style from all the other goalkeepers set her apart from everyone. And so she got that opportunity, and then we also got that opportunity. So myself and the goalkeeping coach were now having conversations with the national team goalkeeping coach for Thailand, and that all came from, how do we help this one girl? Like, how do we help Cathy to go and do something a little bit better? Like,
brilliant. No, it sounds really exciting. I just hope it opens people's minds onto the opportunities that can be out there. And if you can't find opportunities, you got to go about creating them as well. Grant, if you don't mind, we'll move on to the quick fire questions that's on the end of this, that we put to everyone that comes onto the podcast. So the first one being, who are some of the biggest influences on your career so far?
So when I first started, my first job in professional football was at Cowdenbeath in the Championship, and it's just they're a tiny club. But I was really lucky. I got to work with Colin Cameron and Lee Mako, and they're obviously massively experienced from Premier League and Scottish internationals and working Premier League in Scotland. Them basically like showing, this is how professional football works. This is your structure. This is how you speak to people. This is how you behave. This is how training is going to go. My first job, I was just going to stay dead quiet and just go watch everything, and just observe and learn as much as possible, and not really make any waves or anything like that. But that was wonderful just to see what was expected, the way they had conversations, and the way they gave information as well. It was wonderful. But all, like, from a learning point of view, you mentioned the Raymond Verheyen. I went to see him. He spoke down in London a few years ago, and I went through his book and some of his stuff that he's been doing with his online course stuff. Absolutely brilliant. The way he blends, again, it's like the science and the actual coaching elements with how do you speak to people, how do you develop the people within what you're doing, because again, you can run drills, you can run games, you can train people, but if they're not buying into it, if they're not understanding it, if the message isn't clear or something like that, those elements don't tie together in the way you want.
And then what about your biggest strength as a coach?
I think that I've always been open to other stuff. Like, I was like, yeah, sure, I'll do that, no problem. Yeah, that sounds okay. But I've always had the discipline to do things in a specific way. So when I was working for the SFA, I was like, do you want to step up and do some sports science work with Cowdenbeath in the Championship in Scotland? I was like, that kind of makes sense. That one's like, yeah, sure, no problem. But then being offered something to do you want to go and work with squash, or do you want to work with triathlon, or do you want to work with these mums that that don't really want to train, but the doctors told them that you need to go and train. And it's like, yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm sure I'll take something from that. I'll learn that. And then going into it with the mind, it's like, well, how would I speak to that person differently? How am I going to get something out of this? And just kind of, like being adaptable. But again, going, well, you're going to need to learn this and we're going to need to do it this way. But let's find the best way to go about it within that environment, sort of thing.
Yeah, you can definitely learn from working with a number of different athletes, but not even just athletes, but like general pop as well. And there's loads of things to take away from any work you can do with anyone, really.
Yeah.
Next one is there any sort of CPD that stands out that you've done recently? So whether that's like an online course, it might be like a webinar, even just a podcast or a blog or an article, a bit of research. Is there anything that sort of stands out for you?
I actually haven't been doing much lately. So doing my C license, and I did the ASCA level 1 at the same time. So I actually haven't had an awful lot of time to go and look at anything. So taking up a lot of it. But one thing that I did do was I read Jocko Willink's Extreme Ownership.
Yeah.
And Chris Voss has a book on how to negotiate. Never Split the Difference. Reading the two of them together, I'd highly recommend it. Basically, Jocko Willink looks at as like, how are you going to get your idea across to everyone, make sure they're on the same page, and be as successful as possible. And then following on to it, I didn't actually mean it to work out quite as well, but when negotiating, what words are you going to use to get people to be more sympathetic to your ideas? How are you going to structure a conversation so that people are going to be open to an idea if they're opposed to it? So again, like you go right from extreme ownership, I want to deal with this problem and I'm going to do it in this way. I'm going to help these people. But then if somebody's maybe causing friction within it, how you can negotiate and how you can change people's ideas to make sure everybody gets what they want, and how you can help your program. I think those two books together were actually brilliant. They're really, really helpful.
Yeah, I've not actually read his book, but I've heard him speak on a lot of podcasts and videos and things. And the guy's had some incredible experiences, hasn't he? And anyone that doesn't know, go and look him up. I'll maybe try and put a tag in the show notes. But there's so many takeaways, isn't there? He's a former. Was he a Marine? Am I right in saying he was a Marine?
Navy SEAL.
Navy SEAL, yeah. So he's gone through some incredible experiences, but now does a lot of work within businesses and around language communication. I think that's a great point. One that hasn't come up on the podcast yet, but yeah, definitely something that people should go and check out. The final ones, mate. What would you say the most important trait is for a coach to have?
I think more so, like lately, I've learned this is like having very strong relationships with your athletes, and sort of being able to create an environment where they're comfortable. Because of the kind of language issues and the cultural issues, like of how you speak to certain people and whatever in Thailand, I found that you have to trust specific people within the group. So within our women's team, we had like a captain's team. We had 3 captains, and they were from 3 different demographics, so 3 different groups of people, and they were able to solve different problems for us. For me, as the outsider and as a foreigner, not being able to speak the language, it was easier for me to then go to Kathy, who can speak Thai. Her English is better than mine as well, and she can go and solve problems for you. She'd run through brick walls for you. But for more the international girls, you could go and speak to Danny. She would take care of that side of things, and she's a little bit more forwards about it. So she's not going to hang back. She's going to say, you need to do this, you need to do it now. And then if there was a discipline issue, we could go and speak to Amanda, because she was the older one in the group. So she held the responsibility and these sorts of things. Having those strong relationships and having these people trust us was really important, and it allowed us to do all these different things. And it bridges all the gaps between what the Thai speaking girls need to know exactly this, the same as the English speaking girls, or I need warm-ups taken care of. So Danny, you're in charge of organizing the warm-ups. And there's a little argument between these two. Amanda, can you go and sort that? But having that trust and being able to let people come and do jobs for you makes your life easier. But also, again, as you spoke about, they're learning all these different things. So if they don't have a career in football, maybe these girls don't go on to have scholarships, play university or to play pro. Maybe they become coaches off the back of it, and they've seen these little, like, how to create relationships, and they get more information about how to talk to people, how to sort things as well.
You just gave a great real life example of what Damien Hughes has been on the podcast a couple of times before, refers to as cultural architects. So people within your squad that can really be impactful, and you can use them to do, well, different roles like you've just mentioned there. So yeah, I think that's a great point. And then just finally, Grant, just on that, when you're thinking about some of the players that probably that you've had the greatest impact with, and they've been not just the easiest to work with, but you've probably had the greatest achievements with, what would you say is like a sort of common trait amongst those players?
Definitely the ones who are invested in learning, like the ones who, like, just I want to know about this, like, because we set up specifically for the girls team. The boys team was different because they were a bit younger. So the boys teams were 8 to 14, whereas the girls teams were 13 up to senior. For the girls, we very much went, you have to take responsibility. Like, you're a bit older, you have to be in charge of your own learning, because one day we're not going to be there. And the girls who used Huddle to watch back their games, the girls who were actively watching, and they watched the Super League games from England, and they would send messages going, I saw this, why did they do that? Or how can I do that? And those ones, then they were getting the most benefit from it, because they were looking into, all right, well, how I hear that I need to eat better. How am I going to eat better? So I'm going to come and ask. And then that would then lead into a conversation about sleep. And oh, well, I'm not sleeping because I've got to be up at 5 a.m. for school. And then I've got basketball, and then I've got the cello or whatever it is that do. Those ones that then they made themselves far more efficient at taking care of what they needed to do. They actually spent more time preparing, so they knew their jobs better. They then became more confident within the squads, because it's like, well, I'm better prepared, I'm better at these things, I'm getting more success, and it kind of compounds itself, and it builds. And they were the ones that we saw develop the most, just because they were just involved in it. You know, they were watching football all the time, so they're picking up on little skills that they don't even realize they're picking up on. And then the social aspect within the squad is like they're growing within that, because they're more confident, they're more active.
It makes your job a hell of a lot easier as well when they bring those questions to you, doesn't it? When they're asking you about nutrition or you about sleep, then it shows that they're part of the way into buying in already, regardless of even before you've given the information that they need. So yeah, that was fascinating, mate. I think there's so much good stuff in there. I think it's really interesting, your journey, working with the players that you've worked at, but also the commonalities that we've had other coaches talk about, working with completely different squads and completely different players, but there's still things that run throughout different leagues and different clubs. So for me, that was really, really, really interesting. So a big thank you for coming on. I just wanted to ask if people have got any questions, if people want to reach out, maybe even pick your brains on different parts of what we spoke about, what's the best place to do that?
Sure. I have Instagram, or I can pass you an email that you can put in the thing, in the notes. Yeah, anybody can message me on Instagram or LinkedIn. I use LinkedIn quite a lot.
Perfect. Amazing, mate. Well, big thank you for coming on. Thanks for your time. I appreciate it. And we'll stay in touch, and it'll be really interesting to see the sort of next steps and where you end up and the impact you're going to make next.
Awesome. Cheers, man. Thanks for having me. This is good fun.
Great stuff. Thanks, Grant.
Cheers, man. Cheers.